Colonel Marcus Thompson gripped the controls of his F-16 Fighting Falcon as the morning sun cast long shadows across the desert training ground. At 42, he was one of the most decorated pilots in the Air Force, with over 2 decades of service under his belt. Today's mission was supposed to be routine, a joint training exercise with international allies to test combat readiness and coordination. Marcus had led dozens of similar operations, but something felt different this time. The briefing room had been unusually tense that morning. General Patricia Hayes, the commanding officer, had been more stern than usual, her eyes scanning the room of pilots with an intensity that made even seasoned veterans shift uncomfortably in their seats. The exercise involved simulated combat scenarios with foreign aircraft, designed to test response times and tactical decision-making under pressure. Marcus checked his instruments one final time as his squadron prepared for takeoff. Behind him, Captain Jennifer Rodriguez adjusted her helmet, her voice crackling through the radio with pre-flight confirmations. To his left, Lieutenant David Kim ran through his weapon systems check, while Major Ashley Williams coordinated with ground control. The four pilots had flown together for 3 years, developing an almost telepathic understanding of each other's movements and strategies. As they lifted off from Edwards Air Force Base, Marcus felt the familiar rush of adrenaline that came with commanding a multi-million-dollar war machine. The desert stretched endlessly below them, a canvas of brown and gold that had witnessed countless training exercises over the years. Today's scenario would take them over restricted airspace, where they would engage with enemy aircraft piloted by international partners playing the role of aggressors. The radio crackled with updates from Mission Control. Falcon Squadron, this is Control. Your targets are approaching from the northeast, bearing 045. Rules of engagement are weapons hot. Repeat, weapons hot. This is not a drill. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. The phrasing was unusual for a training exercise. Weapons hot meant they were authorized to fire, but in training, that authorization came with multiple safety protocols and clear identification of targets. Control, this is Falcon Leader, Marcus radioed back. Confirm this is a training exercise, requesting verification of target identification protocols. The response came back immediately, sharp and uncompromising. Falcon Leader, you have your orders. Proceed to target area and engage hostile aircraft. Time is critical. Marcus exchanged glances with his wingman through their canopies, both pilots sharing the same confused expression. Something wasn't right. In all his years of service, training exercises followed strict protocols, with multiple layers of confirmation and safety measures. The urgency in the controller's voice suggested this was more than a routine drill. As they approached the designated coordinates, Marcus's radar began painting targets. 4 aircraft, flying in formation, approaching from the direction Control had indicated. The electronic warfare systems immediately began working to identify the aircraft, but the signatures were being jammed or scrambled somehow. Marcus felt his heart rate increase as he realized they were being asked to engage unidentified aircraft without proper confirmation of their identity or hostile intent. Falcon Squadron, maintain formation and prepare for engagement. Lock onto targets and await firing solution. The order came through clearly, but Marcus hesitated. Years of training and experience told him something was fundamentally wrong with this scenario. The weight of command pressed down on Marcus as he watched the unidentified aircraft grow larger on his radar display. In just moments, he would need to make a decision that could change everything. The morning sun seemed to burn brighter as four fighter jets prepared for what they believed might be their last training exercise, but was beginning to feel like something far more serious and potentially catastrophic. Marcus's finger hovered over the weapon selection switch, his mind racing through protocols and possibilities. Behind him, his squadron waited for orders, their trust in his leadership absolute. Whatever happened next would be his responsibility, and his alone. The desert below remained silent and indifferent to the drama unfolding 30,000 feet above, where split-second decisions could mean the difference between a successful mission and an international incident. The radio crackled again with increasing urgency, but Marcus had already begun to suspect that nothing about this morning would go according to plan. His instincts, honed by years of combat experience, were screaming warnings that he couldn't ignore. Something was about to go very wrong, and he was the only one who could prevent it. Captain Jennifer Rodriguez's voice came through the radio, steady, but with an undertone of concern. Falcon Leader, my radar is showing inconsistent readings on these targets, requesting permission to make a closer visual identification pass before engaging. Marcus felt a surge of relief that he wasn't the only one questioning the situation. Rodriguez was one of the sharpest pilots he'd ever flown with, and her tactical instincts were rarely wrong. Negative, Falcon 2, came the immediate response from control. Maintain current distance and prepare for immediate engagement. These targets are confirmed hostile and pose an immediate threat to national security. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. National security. This was supposed to be a training exercise over restricted airspace in Nevada. What kind of national security threat could possibly exist in the middle of a scheduled military exercise? Marcus made a decision that would define his career and possibly his life. Control. This is Falcon Leader. I'm calling an abort on this mission until we can get proper target identification. Something doesn't add up here. The silence that followed was deafening, lasting nearly 10 seconds before Control responded with barely contained fury. Falcon Leader, you are ordered to engage those targets immediately. This is a direct order from the highest levels of command. Any hesitation or refusal to comply will result in immediate court-martial and charges of disobeying orders during a combat situation. Marcus felt sweat beading on his forehead despite the climate-controlled cockpit. The threat was real, and the consequences of disobedience were severe. But as he looked at his radar display, something caught his eye that made his blood run cold. The lead aircraft in the formation ahead was broadcasting a signal, a transponder code that he recognized. It was a friendly IFF identification friend or foe signal, the type used by Allied aircraft to identify themselves to prevent friendly fire incidents. The signal was weak and intermittent, as if being jammed or suppressed, but it was definitely there. Rodriguez, Kim, Williams, Marcus called to his squadron. Are any of you picking up IFF signals from those targets? The responses came back quickly, confirming his worst fears. All four pilots were detecting friendly transponder signals from the aircraft they were being ordered to attack. Control, this is Falcon Leader. We're detecting friendly IFF signals from the target aircraft, requesting immediate clarification before proceeding with engagement. The response came back so quickly that Marcus suspected the controller had been waiting for this exact question. Falcon Leader, those signals are false. The targets are using captured or spoofed transponder codes to confuse our forces. This is a known enemy tactic. You are ordered to disregard IFF signals and engage immediately. Marcus felt a knot forming in his stomach. In all his years of service, he had never encountered a situation where friendly IFF signals were dismissed so casually. The aircraft ahead were now close enough that visual identification might be possible. Marcus made another decision that would either save lives or end his career. Falcon Squadron, we're going to make a high-speed identification pass. Stay in formation and keep your weapons systems armed, but do not engage until we have positive visual confirmation of hostile intent. Falcon Leader, you are directly disobeying orders. The controller's voice was now openly hostile. Return to attack position and engage targets immediately, or face the consequences of mutiny during combat operations. Marcus knew he was crossing a line from which there might be no return, but every instinct he had developed over 20 years of military service was telling him that engaging these aircraft would be a catastrophic mistake. As his F-16 accelerated toward the unknown aircraft, Marcus prepared for the most important visual identification of his career. Whatever he saw in the next few moments would determine whether he saved innocent lives or destroyed his own future in the process. The desert sun glinted off his canopy as he closed the distance, his finger still hovering over the weapon's controls, ready to make the decision that would define the rest of his life. The lead aircraft in the formation ahead began to turn, presenting a profile view that would allow Marcus to identify its type and nationality. His heart pounded, as he waited for the visual confirmation that would either vindicate his decision or prove that he had just committed career suicide by disobeying direct orders in a combat situation. Marcus squinted through his helmet visor as the lead aircraft completed its turn, revealing its profile against the brilliant blue sky. What he saw made his hands shake on the controls. The aircraft was a McDonnell Douglas F-4 Phantom II, painted in the distinctive camouflage scheme of the Royal Air Force. It was a friendly aircraft, part of a joint training exercise with British forces that had apparently been scheduled for the same airspace. "Jesus Christ," Marcus whispered into his radio, forgetting proper communication protocols. "Control, those are RAF aircraft. Repeat, those are Royal Air Force F-4 Phantoms. They're friendlies participating in a joint exercise." The silence from control stretched on for nearly 15 seconds before a different voice came through the radio, calmer, more professional, but with an undertone of barely controlled panic. "Falcon Leader, this is General Hayes. Return to base immediately. All aircraft, return to base immediately. This exercise is terminated." Marcus felt a wave of relief wash over him, followed immediately by a surge of anger. Someone had nearly caused an international incident by ordering American fighters to attack British aircraft during a joint training exercise. As his squadron turned back toward Edwards Air Force Base, Marcus's mind raced through the implications of what had just occurred. Either there had been a massive failure in communication and coordination, or someone had deliberately tried to orchestrate an attack on Allied aircraft. Neither possibility was acceptable, and both carried consequences that extended far beyond his own career. The flight back to base was conducted in tense silence, each pilot lost in their own thoughts about what they had just experienced. Marcus knew that once they landed, there would be debriefings, investigations, and possibly court-martial proceedings. His decision to disobey direct orders had saved lives, but it had also opened him up to serious charges under military law. As Edwards Air Force Base came into view, Marcus could see emergency vehicles lined up along the runway, fire trucks, ambulances, and military police cars. The sight made his stomach drop. This level of response suggested that whatever had happened was far more serious than a simple training exercise gone wrong. Someone high up in the chain of command was treating this as a major incident. "Falcon Squadron, this is Tower. You are cleared for immediate landing. Proceed directly to Hangar 7 after touchdown. Do not shut down your aircraft or leave your cockpits until instructed." The formal, clipped tone of the tower controller confirmed Marcus's worst fears. They were being treated as potential criminals rather than pilots returning from a mission. As his F-16 touched down on the runway, Marcus saw dozens of personnel waiting near Hangar 7. Air Force security forces in full combat gear, stood alongside men in civilian suits who could only be investigators from the Air Force Office of Special Investigations. The sight of so many people waiting for their return suggested that the morning's events had already reached the highest levels of military command. Marcus taxied his aircraft to the designated parking spot and began the shutdown procedures, his mind already preparing for the interrogation that was certain to follow. He had made the right decision. He was certain of that. But proving it would require navigating a complex web of military politics, international relations, and possibly criminal charges. The canopy of his F-16 opened with a hydraulic hiss, and Marcus was immediately surrounded by Air Force Security Forces personnel. "Colonel Thompson, you are ordered to remain in your aircraft until further notice. Investigators will be with you shortly." The young sergeant delivering the message avoided eye contact, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. Marcus sat in his cockpit, still strapped into his ejection seat, watching as his squadron members received similar treatment. Captain Rodriguez caught his eye from her aircraft 50 feet away, giving him a subtle thumbs-up gesture that told him she supported his decision. The gesture was small, but it meant everything to Marcus in that moment. A man in a dark suit approached Marcus's aircraft, carrying a clipboard and wearing the kind of serious expression that suggested this conversation would determine the rest of Marcus's military career. "Colonel Thompson, I'm Agent Harrison from the Air Force Office of Special Investigations. I need to ask you some questions about this morning's events. Are you prepared to cooperate fully with this investigation?" Marcus looked down at the investigator, then across the flight line at the other personnel waiting to question his pilots. Whatever happened next, he knew he had made the right choice. The alternative, attacking friendly aircraft and potentially starting an international incident, was unthinkable. But proving that to a military justice system that valued obedience above all else would be the fight of his life. "I'm prepared to cooperate fully," Marcus replied, his voice steady despite the uncertainty of his situation. "But I want it on record that I believe my actions prevented a catastrophic mistake that could have resulted in the deaths of Allied pilots and a major international incident." Agent Harrison made a note on his clipboard, his expression revealing nothing about whether he viewed Marcus as a hero or a criminal. The morning sun was now directly overhead, casting sharp shadows across the flight line as Marcus prepared to face the consequences of his decision. In the distance, he could see more vehicles arriving, staff cars carrying senior officers and civilian officials who would ultimately decide his fate. The weight of command had never felt heavier than it did in that moment, suspended between vindication and disgrace. Agent Harrison climbed a ladder to speak with Marcus at eye level. "Colonel, I need you to understand the gravity of this situation. You directly disobeyed orders during what your superiors believed was a combat situation. The penalties for such actions can include court-martial, dismissal from service, and even imprisonment. However, the circumstances of this morning's events are unusual. Your cooperation in this investigation may be the key to understanding what went wrong. Marcus nodded, understanding that he was walking a tightrope between military justice and political expediency. Agent Harrison, I've been flying for 20 years. I've never disobeyed an order in my career, but something about this morning was fundamentally wrong. The urgency, the refusal to follow standard identification protocols, the dismissal of IFF signals, none of it made sense for a training exercise. That's exactly what we need to understand, Harrison replied. What made you suspicious? What specific details convinced you to disobey direct orders? Marcus thought carefully before responding, knowing that his words would be scrutinized by military lawyers and possibly congressional investigators. The first red flag was the weapons-hot authorization without proper target identification. In training, we follow strict protocols to prevent exactly this kind of situation. The second was the refusal to allow visual identification passes. And the third was being ordered to disregard IFF signals. In my experience, those three factors together suggest either a massive breakdown in command and control, or something deliberately designed to cause friendly fire. Agent Harrison made detailed notes, occasionally asking for clarification on technical aspects of the morning's events. Marcus could see similar conversations taking place around the other aircraft, with each pilot being questioned separately. The thoroughness of the investigation suggested that someone very high in the chain of command was taking this incident extremely seriously. Colonel, I need to ask you directly. Do you believe someone deliberately tried to cause American fighters to attack British aircraft? The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that could reach the highest levels of government. Marcus chose his words carefully, knowing that his response could trigger a major investigation. I believe that the orders we received were inconsistent with standard procedures for training exercises. Whether that was due to incompetence, miscommunication, or deliberate intent is beyond my ability to determine. What I can say is that following those orders would have resulted in attacking Allied aircraft, which would have been catastrophic for everyone involved. Agent Harrison closed his notebook and looked directly at Marcus. Colonel, you're going to be escorted to a secure briefing room where you'll be questioned in greater detail. This investigation has been classified at the highest levels, and you're not to discuss these events with anyone outside of official channels. Do you understand? Marcus nodded, understanding that his life was about to become very complicated. As he was helped down from his aircraft, Marcus caught a glimpse of General Hayes standing near the hangar entrance. Her expression was unreadable, but the fact that she was personally overseeing the investigation suggested that the morning's events had already reached the Pentagon. The weight of potential consequences pressed down on him as he was escorted toward the building. The briefing room was sterile and windowless, equipped with recording equipment and multiple cameras. Marcus recognized it as the type of facility used for sensitive interrogations and classified debriefings. The presence of so much recording equipment suggested that his statements would be preserved for potential use in court proceedings or congressional hearings. Agent Harrison was joined by a military lawyer and another investigator, creating a panel that would dissect every aspect of the morning's events. Colonel Thompson, this session is being recorded. You have the right to have legal counsel present. Do you wish to exercise that right, or are you prepared to proceed? Marcus knew that requesting a lawyer would be seen as an admission of guilt, but proceeding without one was also risky. "I'll proceed without counsel for now," Marcus replied, "but I reserve the right to request legal representation if the nature of this questioning changes." The investigators exchanged glances, clearly expecting this response. They had obviously dealt with situations like this before, where career military officers found themselves caught between duty and conscience. The next several hours would determine whether Marcus Thompson was viewed as a hero who prevented an international incident, or a rogue officer who endangered national security by disobeying direct orders. As the questions began, he prepared to defend not just his actions, but his entire understanding of what it meant to be a military officer in an increasingly complex world. The questioning began with basic facts: times, locations, radio frequencies, and technical details about the aircraft involved. Marcus answered each question precisely, drawing on his years of experience to provide accurate information. But as the session progressed, the questions became more pointed, focusing on his decision-making process and his reasons for disobeying orders. "Colonel Thompson, at what point did you decide to disobey the direct orders you received?" Agent Harrison asked, his pen poised over a legal pad. Marcus had been expecting this question, but it was still difficult to answer. The decision hadn't been made at a single moment, but had evolved as the situation became increasingly suspicious. "I didn't make a conscious decision to disobey orders," Marcus replied carefully. "I made a decision to follow proper identification procedures before engaging potentially friendly aircraft. When those procedures were denied, I had to choose between potentially attacking allies or ensuring proper target identification. I chose the option that prioritized the safety of all personnel involved." The military lawyer, a colonel himself, leaned forward. "But you were explicitly ordered to disregard IFF signals and engage immediately. In a combat situation, such hesitation could be fatal. How do you justify ignoring direct orders from your superiors? Marcus had known this question would come, and he had prepared his response carefully. Sir, I was trained to follow lawful orders. I was also trained to prevent friendly fire incidents at all costs. When those two imperatives came into conflict, I had to make a judgment call based on my experience and training. The presence of friendly IFF signals, combined with the unusual nature of the engagement orders, suggested that attacking would violate both military law and international agreements. The second investigator, who had been silent until now, spoke up. Colonel, are you suggesting that your superiors gave you unlawful orders? The question was a trap, Marcus realized. Accusing superior officers of giving unlawful orders was a serious allegation that could result in additional charges if it couldn't be proven. I'm suggesting that the orders I received were inconsistent with standard operating procedures and international law regarding the identification of targets before engagement. Whether those orders were unlawful would be a determination for military lawyers and courts to make. Marcus's careful phrasing was designed to avoid making direct accusations while still highlighting the problematic nature of the situation. Agent Harrison consulted his notes before asking the next question. Colonel, you mentioned that something felt wrong about the situation from the beginning. Can you be more specific about what raised your suspicions? Marcus thought back to the briefing room that morning, trying to identify the specific details that had made him uncomfortable. General Hayes seemed unusually tense during the briefing. The language used by Mission Control was more appropriate for an actual combat situation than a training exercise, and the refusal to follow standard safety protocols was unprecedented in my experience. Individually, these factors might have been explained by unusual circumstances. Together, they suggested something was seriously wrong. The military lawyer made a note and looked up at Marcus. Colonel, you've been flying for 20 years. In that time, have you ever encountered a situation where enemy aircraft successfully spoofed friendly IFF signals? The question was designed to test Marcus's technical knowledge and his justification for trusting the signals he detected. Yes, sir, I have. But spoofing typically involves false signals added to mask true identity, not the suppression of signals that are then dismissed by command. The signals we detected were consistent with genuine friendly transponders, not sophisticated spoofing technology. The pattern suggested equipment malfunction or jamming, not enemy deception. Agent Harrison leaned back in his chair, studying Marcus carefully. Colonel, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I need you to think carefully before answering. Based on your experience and the events of this morning, do you believe someone deliberately attempted to cause American fighters to attack British aircraft? The room fell silent as Marcus considered his response. The question went to the heart of what had happened that morning. If Marcus answered yes, he would be alleging a conspiracy that could reach the highest levels of military command. If he answered no, he would be suggesting that the near catastrophe was the result of incompetence or miscommunication, which might be easier to accept but wouldn't explain all the unusual circumstances. I believe that the combination of factors I observed, the deviation from standard protocols, the refusal to allow proper identification procedures, and the dismissal of friendly IFF signals, suggests either a massive failure in command and control systems or a deliberate attempt to cause friendly fire. I cannot determine which scenario is accurate based on the information available to me as a pilot. Marcus's answer was carefully crafted to avoid direct accusations while still highlighting the severity of what had occurred. The investigators exchanged glances, clearly recognizing that he was walking a careful line between cooperation and self-preservation. The questioning continued for another hour, covering technical details about the aircraft involved, the radio communications, and the specific procedures that had been violated. Marcus answered each question as precisely as possible, but he could sense that the investigators were looking for something more, some admission or insight that would help them understand the larger implications of the morning's events. Finally, Agent Harrison closed his notebook and looked directly at Marcus. "Colonel Thompson, you understand that your actions this morning may have prevented a catastrophic international incident. However, you also disobeyed direct orders during what your superiors believed was a combat situation. The resolution of this matter will depend on factors beyond your control. Are you prepared to accept the consequences of your actions?" Marcus met the investigator's gaze steadily. "I'm prepared to accept the consequences of preventing American fighters from attacking Allied aircraft during a training exercise. If that's a crime, then I'll face the punishment. But I won't apologize for making the right decision under impossible circumstances." The formal interview concluded with Marcus being escorted to a secure holding area where he would wait for the next phase of the investigation. As he sat alone in the small room, he reflected on the morning's events and the decision that had changed his life forever. Whatever happened next, he knew he had acted according to his conscience and his training, even if that meant sacrificing his career. Through the small window of the holding room, Marcus could see activity on the flight line as investigators examined his aircraft and interviewed ground personnel. The scope of the investigation was expanding, suggesting that the morning's events had triggered a comprehensive review of the entire incident. Someone very high in the chain of command was taking this matter seriously. Hours passed before Agent Harrison returned with additional personnel, a general officer Marcus didn't recognize, and a woman in civilian clothes who introduced herself as being from the Department of Defense Inspector General's office. The presence of such high-ranking officials suggested that the investigation had reached the highest levels of government. "Colonel Thompson," the general began, "I'm General Robert Mitchell from the Pentagon. I've been sent to personally oversee this investigation. The events of this morning have raised serious questions about command and control procedures, and potentially about the integrity of our military command structure. Your cooperation in this matter is essential to getting to the truth." Marcus stood at attention, recognizing that he was now dealing with officials who had the power to determine not just his fate, but potentially the fate of other officers involved in the morning's events. "General, I'm prepared to cooperate fully with this investigation. My primary concern is ensuring that something like this never happens again." The woman from the Inspector General's office opened a thick folder and spread several documents across the table. "Colonel, we've been reviewing the communications logs from this morning's exercise. What we've found is disturbing. The orders you received appear to have originated from a source that was not authorized to direct combat operations. We need your help in understanding how this could have happened." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine as the implications of her words sank in. If the orders had come from an unauthorized source, then the morning's events weren't just a training accident or a failure in communication. They were potentially an act of sabotage or treason aimed at causing an international incident. "Ma'am, I followed the chain of command as I understood it. The orders came through normal channels, using proper authentication codes. If those orders weren't legitimate, then someone with access to classified communication systems deliberately tried to cause friendly fire." Marcus's voice was steady, but he felt the weight of what he was saying. General Mitchell leaned forward, his expression grave. "Colonel, what you're describing is exactly what we're investigating. Someone with high-level access to military communication systems appears to have orchestrated this morning's events. Your decision to disobey orders may have prevented not just friendly fire, but a deliberately planned attack designed to damage relations between the United States and the United Kingdom." The room fell silent as Marcus absorbed this information. The morning's events hadn't been an accident or a failure in communication. They had been a deliberate attempt to cause an international incident that could have had catastrophic consequences for both countries and NATO as a whole. "General, if what you're saying is true, then there's a traitor in the military command structure with access to the highest levels of classified communications. That person nearly succeeded in causing American fighters to attack British aircraft. The implications go far beyond my career or even this incident." Marcus felt the weight of the situation settling on him as he realized he had stumbled into something much larger than a training exercise gone wrong. The Inspector General's representative nodded grimly. "Colonel, you're absolutely right about the implications. This investigation is now a matter of national security. We need you to help us understand exactly what happened this morning and to identify any other unusual circumstances that might help us find the person responsible for this attempted sabotage." As Marcus prepared to provide even more detailed testimony, he realized that his decision to disobey orders had not only saved lives, but had also exposed what appeared to be a major security breach at the highest levels of military command. The morning that had started as a routine training exercise had become a case study in the complexity of military decision-making and the courage required to do the right thing under impossible circumstances. The weight of what he had prevented and what he had discovered would stay with him for the rest of his career, regardless of how the investigation concluded. But as he prepared to help uncover the truth behind the morning's events, Marcus knew that he had made the right choice, even if it had put his own future at risk. The investigation that followed would consume the next several months of Marcus's life, as he worked with federal investigators to uncover the source of the unauthorized orders. What they discovered would shake the military establishment to its core and lead to the exposure of a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of government. But that morning in the desert, all Marcus knew was that he had trusted his instincts and prevented a catastrophe that could have changed history. As he prepared to face whatever consequences awaited him, Marcus reflected on the oath he had taken 20 years earlier when he first put on the uniform. He had sworn to defend the Constitution and protect the nation from all enemies, foreign and domestic. That morning, he had done exactly that, even when it meant disobeying direct orders from his superiors. The cost of that decision was still to be determined, but the value of it would be measured in lives saved and trust preserved between allies. The investigation revealed that a rogue intelligence officer, Major William Burke, had orchestrated the entire incident as part of a larger conspiracy to undermine NATO unity and create instability in international relations. Burke had used his position within the Defense Intelligence Agency to access classified communication systems and issue the unauthorized orders that nearly resulted in friendly fire. Burke's motivation was eventually determined to be financial, as he had been receiving payments from foreign interests seeking to damage Western military alliances. The plot was sophisticated, involving multiple layers of false authentication and the exploitation of legitimate training exercises to create plausible cover for the attack orders. The exposure of Burke's conspiracy led to a comprehensive review of communication security protocols and the implementation of additional safeguards to prevent similar incidents in the future. Marcus's decision to trust his instincts and disobey orders had not only prevented an international incident, but had also exposed a major security breach that could have had far-reaching consequences. In the end, Marcus was not only cleared of all charges, but was commended for his actions and promoted to the rank of brigadier general. His decision to prioritize safety over blind obedience became a case study in military leadership schools, illustrating the importance of moral courage in command positions. The British pilots who had been targeted in the attack were never aware of how close they had come to being fired upon by their American allies. The incident remained classified for several years, but when it was eventually declassified, it served as a powerful reminder of the importance of proper identification procedures and the courage required to question orders when circumstances don't make sense. Marcus continued to serve for another 10 years, eventually retiring as a major general with a reputation as one of the most thoughtful and principled leaders in the Air Force. He often spoke to young officers about the importance of moral courage and the responsibility that comes with command authority. The morning in the desert became a defining moment not just for Marcus, but for military doctrine regarding the balance between obedience and judgment in critical situations. The incident led to changes in training protocols, communication procedures, and the emphasis placed on moral courage in military leadership education. Years later, when Marcus was asked about his decision to disobey orders that morning, he would simply say that he had done what any good officer should do. He had trusted his training, his experience, and his conscience to make the right decision under impossible circumstances. The fact that it had nearly cost him his career was less important than the fact that it had prevented a catastrophe that could have changed the course of international relations. The desert where the incident occurred returned to its normal routine of training exercises and test flights, but the lessons learned from that morning continued to influence military doctrine and training for years to come. Marcus's story became a reminder that sometimes the most important decisions are made not in boardrooms or briefing rooms, but in the cockpit of a fighter jet, where split-second choices can have consequences that echo through history. The investigation into Major Burke's conspiracy revealed connections to other attempts to undermine Western military cooperation, leading to a broader counterintelligence effort that prevented additional attacks and exposed a network of foreign operatives working within the defense establishment. Marcus's decision to trust his instincts had opened a door that led to the disruption of a much larger threat to national security. As Marcus looked back on his career, he recognized that the morning in the desert had been the most important few minutes of his professional life, not because of the recognition or promotion that followed, but because it had tested his character and his commitment to doing the right thing regardless of the personal cost. In a profession where following orders was paramount, he had demonstrated that sometimes the greatest act of loyalty was knowing when to disobey. The friendship between Marcus and his squadron members, Captain Rodriguez, Lieutenant Kim, and Major Williams, was strengthened by their shared experience of that morning. All four pilots were eventually promoted and continued to serve with distinction, but they never forgot the lesson they had learned about the importance of moral courage in the face of impossible circumstances. The incident also led to improved coordination between international partners during joint training exercises, with additional safeguards put in place to prevent confusion about the identity and intentions of participating aircraft. The near catastrophe had highlighted vulnerabilities in the system that, once addressed, made similar incidents far less likely to occur. In the years that followed, Marcus often reflected on the weight of command and the responsibility that came with making decisions that could affect not just his own career, but the lives of others and the relationships between nations. The morning in the desert had taught him that leadership wasn't just about following orders or making popular decisions. It was about having the courage to do what was right, even when the consequences were uncertain. The story of that morning became part of military folklore, passed down through generations of pilots and commanders, as an example of the importance of moral courage and the willingness to question authority when circumstances demand it. Marcus's decision to trust his instincts and disobey orders had not only prevented a catastrophe, but had also strengthened the principles upon which military leadership was built. As Marcus prepared for retirement, he knew that his legacy would be defined not by the medals he had earned or the positions he had held, but by the decision he had made on a clear morning in the Nevada desert, when he had chosen to do what was right rather than what was easy. The weight of that decision had shaped his entire career and had reminded him daily of the responsibility that came with wearing the uniform of the United States Air Force. The desert morning that had started as a routine training exercise had become a defining moment in Marcus's life and career, a reminder that the most important battles are sometimes fought not against foreign enemies, but against the temptation to follow orders blindly, without questioning their morality or their consequences. His story would continue to inspire military leaders for generations to come, serving as a powerful example of the courage required to do the right thing when everything depends on making the correct choice. The final report on the incident concluded that Marcus Thompson had acted with exceptional moral courage and professional judgment in preventing what could have been a catastrophic international incident. His decision to disobey orders had exposed a major security breach and had led to significant improvements in military communication protocols and security procedures. As Marcus walked away from his final day of active duty, He carried with him the knowledge that he had served his country with honor and distinction, but more importantly, that he had made the right choice when it mattered most. The morning in the desert would always be with him, a reminder of the moment when he had chosen conscience over convenience and had helped prevent a tragedy that could have changed the course of history. The weight of command had been heavy, but Marcus had carried it with dignity and courage, proving that the greatest leaders are those who have the strength to do what is right, even when the personal cost is high. His story would continue to inspire future generations of military officers, reminding them that sometimes the most important orders are the ones that come from within, the voice of conscience that speaks louder than any external command. In the end, Marcus Thompson's legacy was not just that of a decorated military officer, but of a man who had the courage to trust his instincts and do what was right when everything depended on making the correct choice. The morning in the desert had tested his character and his commitment to his principles, and he had emerged stronger for having faced that test with honor and integrity. The story concluded with Marcus's retirement ceremony, where he was recognized for his years of service and his exceptional moral courage in preventing an international incident. As he looked out at the young officers in the audience, he knew that his story would continue to inspire them to have the courage to do what is right, even